Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing today? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is $3 Theater. And I love the 80s, right? And that's not an uncommon thing to say. That's not a unique take on anything, right? And we all love the 80s. We all like going back and looking at those movies and seeing how they've held up over time and seeing the evolutionary change and how cinema and blockbusters were created during that decade is always going to be amazing. And the movies that came out, in my opinion, a lot of them are just absolute timeless classics that are never, ever, 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 ever going to be beaten by today's kind of cookie cutter, algorithmically driven, if you're Warner Brothers at least, creative process. And I just find it to be when people try to go back to the 80s and recall from that glory, which is why this story to me is kind of fascinating because it could be good or it could be bad. But I want to talk about The Howling. Now, The Howling was a 1981 Joe Dante directed movie about werewolves and serial killers and weird cults and stuff. And I saw it when I was a kid. I so need to go back and watch it again. But I remember really liking it when I was a kid because, again, who doesn't like werewolf movies? You know what I mean? This opened the same year as American Werewolf in London. So it was a good year. It was a good year for for werewolf movies back in 1981. But anyway, when it comes to this movie, what we found out yesterday was the Andy Muschietti is going to be taking over a remake for Netflix. Yeah, that's a thing, right? That's a thing. That's a reality. Now, Andy Muschietti, I like quite a bit. I really enjoyed It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2. A lot of people out there didn't really care for It Chapter 2. I felt that because it's always like the weaker part of the story is the back half. The first half, the setup is amazing with the Losers Club when they're adults, like they're just not likable. So it's one of those things where you're like, okay, whatever. But he did a really good job with it. I think it's a great event series in regards to movies. And you get like 5 hours almost of just like good Stephen King adaptations. So why the hell is he doing this? Yesterday he signed on to go do Flashpoint, where that came out, that he's doing Flashpoint. And then we find out that he's doing this one in between. Anyway, it says here, having scored with a little assist from our collective dismay at Creepy Clowns, two of the most financially successful horror films of all time, It director Andy Muschietti has a pretty clearly entered the blank check era of his career. You know the one. It's the part of a young director's career where their individual dream projects tend to take shape because, hell, they made $1 billion, right? Which is true. Now, Muschietti has already signed up to direct Warner Brothers' long-promised semi-cursed Flash movie, which he talked about briefly while moderating a panel for the new movie Underwater. But per the hashtag show, he also revealed that he'll be digging in what he'll be digging into after that. And it says here, it's a young horror fan becomes old horror director, a remake of Joe Dante's classic werewolf story, The Howling, for Netflix. Now, and I like the fact that it's for Netflix. I do. I like the fact that it's for Netflix because this movie is wild, Anyway, directed by Joe Dante in 1981, The Howling drew praise for its creature effects as well as and for Dante's soon-to-be signature blend of horror and comedy. It was enough to help enough of a success to help move Dante into his own "trust me, this will work" era, spurring Warners to put enough faith in him to get Gremlins off the ground. And I love this one here. Please keep your hands the F off of Gremlins, please. Don't remake it. Give us a third movie. Just give us a third movie. Fans would go for that one. As much as I lament 1980s remakes, I love Gremlins 1 and Gremlins 2 for different reasons. And doing a Gremlins 3 would be fine with me, provided Joe Dante is involved. You got to give me Joe Dante. Anyway, it says there's no word yet on what form the project might take. Muschietti has a whole 2020 superhero blockbuster to get through. And if nothing else, we can keep our claws crossed for some kick-ass new effects. And also would accept a Robert Picardo cameo if it comes to that. I would love to see a Robert Picardo cameo. I worked with him on a movie a couple years ago. Really nice guy. Really nice guy. But anyway, so looking over here at the plot of The Howling. If you don't know the plot of The Howling, it's interesting, right? So it says here that it's a 1981 horror film directed by Joe Dante, starring Dee Wallace, Patrick McEnany. Dee Wallace is the mom from E.T., by the way. And Robert Picardo, good old Robert Picardo. Based on the novel the same name by Gary Bradner. The film follows a television newswoman sent to a remote cabin resort after a near-fatal incident with a serial killer unaware that the residents were all werewolves. Cool setup. And it's definitely a wild movie. And something that a lot of people really like, because back then it was made for just a budget of $1.5 million, and it pulled in 17.9 million. That's actually pretty good for the early 1980s. Back then, money could go a lot further. What that spawned was a whole series of films. Now, there are three novels. And then there are a bunch of movies, right? So The Howling is based on the first book in the trilogy. However, the plot only vaguely similar. And, so it's like they only kind of adapted it a little bit, right? So in The Howling, the main book was published in 1977, saying after a violent act, Karen Beatty and her husband go to the peaceful California village of Drago to escape the savagery of the city, but their lives slowly become more separate. The novel, loosely adapted as a motion picture, is the closest adaptation. And the closest adaptation is the fourth film in the Howling series. So they just kind of took it and they kind of they just adapted it a little bit. This is a problem with adaptations. Like, why not? It kind of feels like if it's only a loose adaptation, just call it something different. But anyway, that's the world we live in. Then they did Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, 4 years later. Saying the second film in the second Howling film, directed by Felipe Mora, stars Christopher Lee, Reb Brown, Marsha Hunt, and Sybil Danning. The Howling 2 is the only sequel in the series that features a plot that directly follows the original film's events. It is also the only Howling film to feature the input of the original novelist, Gary Bradner. Bradner was critical of the original 1981 film, which was only a loose adaptation of his novel. Some elements of the sequel may have been deliberately divergent from the previous film. After newswoman Karen White's shocking on-screen transformation and violent death, her brother Ben is approached by Stefan Krosco, the mysterious gentleman who claims that Karen was a werewolf, providing videotaped evidence of the transformation. Krosco convinces Ben and Jenny to accompany him to Transylvania to battle Sturba, an immortal werewolf queen. That sounds wild, man. That sounds amazing. I haven't seen these. I've seen the first one. I remember seeing the first one. I never saw the other one. Then he had The Howling 3 that was written and directed by Felipe Mora. And it says here, a scientist discovers that there are marsupial werewolves in Australia, and one of them works in a horror movie. So, I mean, like, make this, adapt this kind of stuff. That's why not? Turn this into a Howling series, just TV series. Like, oh, this marsupial werewolves in Australia. We've got to go and take them out, got to get down there and got to go fight the marsupial werewolves. Considering the fact that, and this is 100% real, 500 million animals have just died in brush fires in Australia, this may not be the right time for that kind of adaptation. And my heart goes out to the people in Australia, 100%. Then you got The Howling 4, the original Nightmare. And this one, the original Nightmare, is not so much a sequel, but more of a faithful adaptation of the original novel with subtle alterations. The film focuses on Maria, a successful suspense author who's sent to the small town of Drago by her husband after suffering a nervous breakdown and becomes tormented by visions and werewolves. So this one is more of what the book originally was. But if you know the plot of the first movie, where a television newswoman gets attacked by gets used as bait to hunt down a serial killer, he gets killed, and then she has PTSD, so they send her to this cabin in the woods sort of thing. And then everyone there is a werewolf and everything else goes on. It's like, that's kind of a crazier story, I think. Then you've got The Howling 5 Rebirth, which came out the next year, saying a group of eclectic travelers attends the opening of a long-sealed European castle and are later slowly being killed off by a werewolf. Now to survive, they must find out which one of them is the murderer. So it's The Thing. It's the plot line to The Thing, but with werewolves. Again, not against it. Not against it. So I need to see these. Then you got The Howling 6, The Freaks. Okay, The Freaks is based on the Howling trilogy of novels and contains minor elements from the Howling 3 echoes. Let's see here, which is a 1985 horror novel by the American author Gary Bradner. It's the third and final book in this Howling series. Like its predecessor, The Howling 2, the book has not been adapted for the screen and bears virtually no similarity to The Howling 3 or any of the other films. Anyway, so the solitary drifter who is cursed as a sympathetic werewolf is later recruited by a supernatural being, as well as werewolves being used in carnival freak shows. Oh my God. Okay, R.B. Harker, carnival owner, captures Ian, a solitary drifter and werewolf, to work on his carnival, where Ian is put on display with other human oddities. To further complicate matters, Harker too is a supernatural creature, a vampire, with a secret objective to recruit Ian by making him into a killer. Oh my god. No, this story just got real crazy. Okay, then we got the Howling New Moon Rising, 1995. Uh, so apparently, Howling New Moon Rising is the only sequel to the series since Howling 2 to attempt a continuity. Furthermore, the film utilizes footage from the Howling 4, the Howling 5, and Howling 6, featuring characters from those films. After the arrival of a mysterious motorcyclist, the peace of desert town is shattered by gruesome murders. A detective investigates the case, helped by a priest who is certain the killings are the work of a werewolf, leading the two of them to uncover several clues that connects the events from a majority of one latter part of the series. So, okay, so this kind of ties it all in, right? This is kind of tying it, bringing it back. You know, this is like, you can kind of look at the Howling New Moon Rising like the return of Skywalker, right, to the whole franchise. Like, oh, we didn't really have a plan, but let's find a way to link it all back together. And then you've got Halloween Reborn, which came out 24 years later. It says the film stars, the story is credited to the novel The Howling 2. A teenager outcast named Will Kidman discovers he's a werewolf and must battle a pack of brutal creatures when they threaten him and his new girlfriend. And we can see here that the movies just get progressively crappier on Rotten Tomatoes over time. First one, 66%, 22, 18, 17, 20. I mean, like, you can kind of see that, right? It feels a bit like that. Now, when I look at something like The Howling, when I look at this whole series of films, and I know I might have bored you guys going through the Wikipedia for all this stuff, it just sounds amazing to me that these movies, for one, kept being profitable enough to keep getting made over the span of literally 30 years, right? Of 30 years, they went through and they made these movies. And that's great. And now they want to do a remake with Andy Muschietti. So I kind of am a little less against this. I view the Howling series like I view the Tremor series. And the Tremors movies are just fun, in my opinion. They're fun and they're stupid and they keep things going and they get real dumb over time, but they're fun nonetheless. And that, you know, but if someone were to come out and say, like, let's go and remake the original Tremors, and I'm like, but you don't have Kevin Bacon or Fred Ward, like, I'm not interested. Or Fred Willard. I think it's Fred Willard. You know, or Reba McEntire, right? You don't have Bert or Rainier Richards or the guy who played Shen from Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, like, Tremors is a classic film, and this movie is a classic movie, and they kind of have these really dumb sequels that follow them, but there's clearly a love there. So I don't know. I mean, like, I'm kind of like down to see what Muschietti did. I mean, he took it and he adapted it into something that was pretty kick-ass. Even though the original miniseries is lauded by many as being terrible, it's a very near and dear piece of my childhood. I love that movie. So, like, I love the miniseries. So I'm down to see what he does with this. I think he's a good person to do it. But I also want Joe Dante to come back and remake it because I want Dante's satire and I want his dark comedy and I want his humor. And I think Muschietti can definitely touch into that. There's a lot of dark humor in it that can be used here, but it really depends. Are they remaking the Dante movie or are they remaking the novel? And it sounds like they're remaking the Dante movie, but he just said that he's remaking The Howling. So is it going to be the book or is it going to be the movie? And since Netflix is really big into the novel adaptations, especially of Stephen King, it makes me wonder if they picked up the rights to the book and that's going to ultimately be what the remake is. We'll have to wait and see what's going on with that one. Clearly it's a long ways away, but it could be a fair amount of fun. If this is something you're interested in, I'd like to know your thoughts on this one. Let me know down in the comments below. If you made it this far, and I applaud you if you did, please type Howling into the comment section so I know you guys made it. And if you want to, subscribe and like and hit that bell and all that jazz. And I'll talk to you guys all later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you for watching and peace out.